So I feel really crass talking about making money after a charity presentation that was so good, but I have to say, if VR is going to be successful, we want developers to make profits on their games so they can put those profits into making bigger and better VR games. So hopefully it's a good thing. It's not about making lots and lots of money. It's about making enough to make great VR moving forwards. So this is nDreams. We're a team, very briefly, of about 50 people based in Farnborough, not far from Guildford, about half an hour from London by train. And we've been working on VR since 2013. So we got in very, very early, pivoted the studio in the very early days of VR. And we've now launched 6 VR titles so far. So we've got quite a lot of games out in the wild, apps, experiences on multiple platforms. We started with a free title called Skydiving, a couple of Gear VR and Google Cardboard titles, and then we've now released 2 games on Vive, Oculus, PlayStation VR, as well as a launch Daydream title, which we've really enjoyed, and lots more in the works. One thing I will say is the VR market is, just like a lot of new technologies, it's growing slowly. We're seeing a very typical new technology curve. This is the sales of Android and iPhone units over the first 11 quarters. Now, a lot of people look back and go, oh yeah, it was massive, it was just huge, it took off straight away. But actually, there was a very gradual rise as people got used to it, as the costs came down, as it just kind of worked. It took a while, and I think we're seeing exactly the same thing in VR, and that's the same thing that's been true of color printers and color televisions and all sorts of things in the past. So it's not a surprise, and we are in this sort of gradual journey, and it's going to take a while. VR is not going to get mass market in the next year or two. It's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years before it's really, really big. But the good thing is it's growing, and it's actually possible to make money in VR now. The other thing worth saying is, and I don't know if you guys have seen this is the Gartner hype curve. So this is, again, very typical of lots of different technologies. You get a huge amount of positive hype before it launches. Everyone gets incredibly excited about something. It launches, and then you get negative hype when people realize that it doesn't change the world, and actually it's a bit expensive, and there isn't a lot to do with it initially, and people don't really understand it. And it takes a little while before it then takes up. We get the slope of enlightenment as people kind of understand it and get it, and it really flourishes as a technology. VR is very much on this downward negative curve at the moment, the trough of disillusionment, because it's just come out, and there's been way too much positive excitement about how massive, how it's going to change everything. And it will, but it's going to take a while. So don't be surprised by that. So reiterating some figures you saw earlier, this is Samsung announced they've shipped 5 million, I should say, units of Gear VR. I don't know whether they've actually sold that many in, but they announced they've shipped 5 million units a few weeks ago. And the other figures are from SuperData. I think they might be a little bit toppy, but I think they're not far off. So that's the market at the moment. This isn't tens of millions of headsets. We haven't sold 2 million, 5 million wrists. Some of the figures that have been quoted have been crazy. And I feel sorry for developers, because if you believe everything you read, particularly last year, you could be lulled into full sense of security that VR was going to be enormous by now. If I did a search actually the other day, this was yesterday, on Google, and I typed in VR sales, and the top thing that came up on Google was this: Oculus Rift, 3.6 million sales. Vive, 2.1 million sales. So I don't know where they get this data. Well, Statista has been pulled up. But if you're a developer and you type into Google VR sales and you see that kind of info, that's not good, because those numbers are a factor of 10 out from reality for Vive and Rift for sure. So you have to be careful. It's very, very easy to be misled by crazy numbers and rubbish numbers that are out there. So don't believe the hype. What you have to do as a developer to make money is to be smart. Plan for it to be a very gradual, slow journey. Plan for slow, steady growth, and make sure you're not spending crazy amounts of money on your projects. Make sure you're spending enough that you really believe you can break even with some decent, sensible sales. You obviously can't plan for a hit. The good news is, having said all that, as was mentioned earlier, this great Bill Gates quote about people overestimating growth at the beginning of a new technology and underestimating growth at the end. And I think, having been to a few VR shows over the last few months, everybody in the industry seems to feel that's the case. People have overestimated how big this is and how fast this is going to grow, but actually the potential of VR is incredible. And I think most of these are fairly recent reports, but there's an awful lot of very, very good stuff happening. And the great news is that all of the big technology companies are working on VR and investing millions, billions of pounds in VR. They believe it's going to be huge, and they're continuing to invest in that. So although it's taking a little while to take off, although this isn't going to be mass market in the next few months, this is going to get there. And there's a huge amount of investment being made to make sure it gets there, which I think is great. So as a developer, the first thing you really need to think about if you want to make money in VR is picking your platform and comparing whether you're going to dive into mobile VR and high-end VR. Should you support both? It's quite a big ask because they are quite different. There's very different levels of graphical quality. Controllers are different. The cost and the budget for developing games are definitely different. You know, it's going to take you significantly more to develop a great high-end VR game than it will be to develop a mobile VR game. Also, the audience is a little bit different. Although Daydream and Gear VR are still generally, a lot of them are gamers. They're much more casual gamers, whereas most of the guys and girls that we're seeing playing our games on Rift, PlayStation VR, and Vive are definitely more core gamers. They're the guys who've got the money, the people that tend to play a lot of games. So we're definitely noticing a casual core difference between the two platforms. And if you've got a particular game you want to make, you might pick whether you go high-end or low-end depending on that type of game. Having said that, actually, I think Daydream has skewed a bit more core than anyone expected, and you know, some of the games that have done best on Daydream have actually been some of the more core games, which is interesting. The other thing that you've got to think about is the RRP. On Rift and PlayStation and Vive, you know, you can charge £20, £30 for a really good VR game. On mobile VR, it's very, very hard to charge more than $9.99. Most games are $4.99, $5.99, maybe even 99p, $1.99. People are used to paying low prices for games. Now, free-to-play isn't prevalent yet on mobile VR. I'm sure it will be. There aren't enough units out there in the market, really. But there are lots of games that offer free demos, free downloads. You can play a bit for free, and then you can buy extra stuff in-game, and that seems to be working pretty well. So the mobile community still like playing and trying stuff out for free. There's a real desire for that. So although premium games are still selling fairly well on mobile VR, I think for us, the future of mobile VR is going to be giving people something for free and then allowing them to buy lots and lots of extra stuff if they enjoy the game. Whereas on high-end VR, it's very much a premium model at the moment. I think it will stay that way for some time. The other thing worth pointing out is that these are just version 1 of these headsets. You know, if you look at where mobile VR is now, that's not where mobile VR is going to be in a year, let alone 5 years' time. We've already seen from the chip manufacturers that positional tracking is coming to mobile VR. I predict within a couple of years, every mobile VR headset will have positional tracking as well as rotational tracking, so you can move your head forwards, sideways, and backwards. And you'll see a lot of leaps coming from other headsets. There's lots of talks about Vive possibly releasing a wireless version of the, Valve and HTC launching a wireless version of the Vive later this year. That's certainly possible. I think you'll see very rapid evolutions of technology coming, which is going to be really interesting. So how do you make money? Well, there's a few different routes. Certainly, if you know what you're doing and you're a good developer and you're capable of creating great stuff and you can excite the first parties, the companies making headsets, there is first-party funding around. So if you've got a great studio, you've got some great ideas, go talk to the mobile phone VR headset companies, go talk to the high-end VR headset companies and tell them about your games, show them some demos, show them some prototypes and get them excited because there is funding available. And certainly for this year and next year, I think there's going to be there's going to be a lot of money available if you're making great stuff from the first parties to try and get things going. You know, there's a bit of a gap between the install base being big enough to support great games and developers being able to fund big, epic, great games on their own. And this is where the first-party funding comes in, and there's certainly some of that happening at the moment. A lot of VR developers we know are doing either work for hire or what we call strategic work for hire. So we do a little bit of strategic work for hire, not much. Most of the games and experiences we do are our own IPs. We fund them ourselves, we publish them ourselves. But if you're given an opportunity to make, somebody wants you to make a VR title for them and it pushes you in the right direction and helps you build some technology and helps you learn and helps you get to where you want to be and maybe you make a bit of profit in the meantime, it's a great way to move forward. And so we're seeing a lot of opportunities for work for hire and strategic work for hire in gaming, but also in other areas. There's a lot of brands, there's a lot of companies out there desperate for great, talented VR developers in pretty much every area you can imagine, from architecture to education to pretty much pick anything, and there's somebody wanting VR done in that area. So this is a really good opportunity as a developer. If you've got a biz dev guy, you've got somebody who can go meet a few people, put the word out to generate some money whilst you're learning about VR and getting better at being a VR developer. And the other route that we took, which is certainly possible, is thinking about whether you want to try and raise some money, get some investments, or get some loans. There are some great opportunities, particularly in the UK, with SEIS and EIS investment. If you're a developer and you haven't heard of SEIS and EIS, you really ought to, because basically it's a way for investors to invest in your company in a really tax-efficient way. So if your company goes under, they don't get a penny back. They keep 70% of the money they've invested if they're a SEIS investor, which is a huge risk lowerer for them and makes it much more attractive to invest in your company. So read up about SEIS and EIS, and there is a real opportunity to raise some money and get investments as a VR developer if you want to. Should you go cross-platform? If you're using Unity or Unreal, this makes it a hell of a lot easier. We use Unity and Unreal within nDreams, depending on the game, depending on the platforms we're using. Both are fantastic engines for VR. The challenge really of going cross-platform is controls and also room scale. A lot of Vive users are demanding or really expect room scale games. They've got a big space in their house. They've made their room nice and empty. They've got this amazing setup, and what they don't want to do is play lots and lots of games where you sit on a chair with a controller, because it's not really making best use of it. So if possible, you really need to try and hit room scale. And if you can come up with a great game design that will work on all three, you can do limited room scale on PlayStation VR and Oculus, and obviously a lot more with HTC. The other thing is controllers. A lot of PlayStation VR users don't have Move controllers, so you can't rely on everyone having Move controllers. So although you have some wireless movement with a PlayStation 4 DualShock, you can actually use it to do a bit of tracking. Obviously, it's nowhere near the level of fidelity of an Oculus Touch or HTC Vive controller. So you do have to think about how your game is going to work on a standard DualShock PS4 as opposed to an Oculus Touch. The future of VR in our eyes is all about hand tracking, whether that's with controllers or just with your hands on mobile devices, and I think that's where we see it going. But at the moment, you can't rely on everyone having Move controllers on the PlayStation VR, which does limit you a little bit. There are huge financial benefits, though, of being cross-platform, genuinely. If you can do it, if you've got the team, you've got the scale to make a game that is cross-platform, it's so worth it, because it doesn't cost you, or it shouldn't cost you, 2 or 3 times as much to develop a game on 2 or 3 platforms. It should cost you twice as much, or 1.5 times as much to do all 3 than it does cost you to do the one, if you're smart about it and you've designed your game that way. And it definitely is a much better way of generating revenue and covering your costs now. I think it's very risky to do a one platform only title unless you're funded and supported by that company. I think the single most important advice I would give, and we're thinking about this very, very hard, is when you're coming up with the game and you go, I want to put this in VR, you've got to ask yourself, is this only possible in VR? Why VR? What makes this so special in VR? If your game could work just as easily in 2D, it just looks a bit cooler in VR, it's not going to work. It's not going to be a hit. The games that are successful in VR are the ones, as far as we can see, that think cleverly about how they're using VR. Ideally stuff that just won't work on any other format and only makes sense in VR because it really uses the combination of the looking around and the touch controls. So think really hard about every game. It's very easy to rush into developing a game because think it'd be cool and it looks great, but it's got to be more than, oh wow, I can look around. It's got to be something exciting about why it's in VR over and above a 2D screen or a mobile. I think that's a really, really key thing to take away. And the other thing is, if you're trying to make money, you've got to set your budget at a sensible price. You can't go and make a photorealistic Call of Duty, Halo, Battlefront and spend 10 million on a VR game at the moment, because you won't get that back. The market is too small. The nice thing is the market's growing and the quality and the price that you can spend on games is growing as well. But you need to be smart about your game design. That might be having game design where you have lots of reusable gameplay. You play the same kind of things in different ways rather than having a linear, beginning to end game. It may be that you think about the graphics. You don't need to have realistic graphics to be believable. Nobody plays, been some fantastic VR demos out there which are cartoony or cel-shaded or all sorts of different styles. All you need to do is to be consistent. And so as long as you've got a consistent visual style, as long as your visual style goes right through your game from beginning to end, that's all you want. You don't need it to be realistic. You don't need it to look stunning. You don't need to spend millions of pounds doing the most incredible artwork, all the most incredible animations and keyframe motion capture characters. You can be smart about it. So pick your battles, pick your budgets, because if you try and do everything, you're going to struggle to break even, I think. The other thing that's interesting is that VR is opening up a load of niches. There are millions or hundreds of thousands anyway of different niches and areas that you could be exploring in VR. You could be the VR developer that does this area better than anybody else. And sometimes it's best to pick an area and really specialize it and do it incredibly well. So I don't know, a stupid example, but maybe you decide that golf in VR is going to be unbelievable. Actually feeling like you're there on the golf course is going to be the coolest thing in the world. You love golf. You could specialize your team in making the very best VR golf game, getting it absolutely perfect, building on top of that, and become the go-to company for that. It's a niche that I think will be big enough to generate significant revenue and to build a company off, and it's less likely to be, if you just aim to do another shooter or another game that sort of crosses over with everybody else, it's very hard to, it's going to be harder and harder to get awareness. So pick a niche or pick an area that nobody else is doing. Try and be unique, try and be different, and as I said, make sure that it's all about VR. Why does this need VR? How does this use VR properly? I think another key thing is experimenting. It's amazing how often something you think will work doesn't work in VR, and also amazing how often you think something, yeah, that'd be great, works really, really badly. A very simple example, when we started doing our very first game that we chucked out was a free game called skydiving, where you jump off a mountain in the air and fall down to your death and hit the ground at terminal velocity, and it's pretty cool. And one of the best things actually was the moment where you're stood there and you look down and you have to physically push the controller to move yourself over the edge to start falling, and that actually having to push yourself off the edge and start it was one of the most exciting bits. Actually, it was really, really interesting. But we had two things we tried. One was collecting orbs. What a great way. Every game does collectibles. If you're falling down, you can steer over, try and collect these great big glass orbs or things. They'll be fantastic. You collect as many as you can. That's a slam dunk. That'll easily work. And then we thought, well, trampolines. We could put trampolines in the air. That's going to be horrible in VR. That's going to be the worst thing in the world. It turns out that actually, when you're falling in first person towards glass orbs, you're really scared because you're about to hit them with your head, and that's terrifying, and so nobody wanted to go near them, and it didn't work at all, and it was horrendous, so we had to remove those. And on the other side, it actually turned out that because you knew how a trampoline worked and you knew you were going to hit it and you expected the movement to change, and it was very fast and instantaneous and you were going back the other way, actually it was comfortable. Nobody got sick at all, and they all really liked it, and it worked well. But we couldn't have predicted that. Without trying and testing and prototyping it, we wouldn't have known. So I think my advice is you've got to experiment, you've got to mess around. VR is so new, and even developers like us who've been doing it for 3 years now are still learning new stuff all the time. There's still huge amounts of unexplored territory out there. So don't be afraid to mess around and just try stuff out, because I think one of the most exciting things for me about VR is that we haven't found the new genres yet that I think are going to be the biggest in VR. When people moved over to mobile, the very first mobile games were horrible dual thumbsticks on the screen, copies of old games. And actually, it took a while before people started making motion control games. You remember Flight Control, I think, and things like that. And then they moved on to things like some of the great Candy Crush games and other things that actually used the mobile device very, very cleverly and very well. There will be games like that in VR. There will be games that use VR fantastically well, new types of games, new genres, and they're still starting to emerge, and they're going to take a while. So there's this big open area to experiment, to try new things out, to try new control systems, and I think that's the most exciting thing about VR. And lastly, sort of data. Now, the problem is it's very, very hard getting data because not a lot of people are talking about their games. Alchemy, the guys that did Job Simulator, announced they've done $3 million of revenue. Raw data from Tobias made $1 million of revenue relatively quickly, which is great. I think it's about 30,000 units or something on Steam. Bait by Resolution Games, I think, was a Gear VR title, announced they had over 500,000 downloads by the middle of last year. That was free to play, so obviously downloads is not the same as selling games, but these give you an idea that there is actually money to be made if you can get things right, even now. And a lot of this data is from last year, so we're seeing the install base growing. We're not giving out specific figures for nDreams. What I can say is that we've got some strong 7-figure VR revenue, and we've sold many hundreds of thousands of units so far out of the 6 games that we've launched. So it's early days, but actually things are going well for us as a company. We can see revenue growing, we can see unit sales growing, we can see that there's a market there, and that market is just getting bigger as more headsets grow. There has been a bit of a slowdown post-Christmas, as we expect, but I think you'll see Vive and Oculus and lots of other companies re-promoting their headsets, pushing them harder. 5 million Gear VRs from Samsung is an astonishing figure, and we're very, very bullish about Daydream. Daydream has come out on just the Pixel phone. I haven't got mine on me at the moment, but I believe by the end of this year, it's 10, 15 different phones are all going to be supporting this. It's an open standard, just like Android. One of the biggest advantages of Android, obviously, was that anybody could make an Android phone, and we've seen how massively successful Android has been. Daydream is an open standard. Any phone company can make a Daydream headset, and I believe companies like Samsung and lots of other people are going to be bringing their phones to Daydream, which is going to be very, very exciting. So we're very bullish about Daydream. We think it's got a very, very rapid growth this year, and I think that's going to be an interesting play alongside Gear VR, which is already there. But don't discount things like PlayStation VR. You know, there's I can't remember the numbers actually, forgive me, but I think they announced fairly recently 45, 43 million, maybe as much as 50 million PlayStation 4s out there in the wild now. And PlayStation VR has sold out. They're making more. You know, it's been a pretty successful launch. I think Sony were fairly conservative, but actually, you know, we're seeing some really good sales on PlayStation VR, and we think that's going to grow. So there is definitely a market. VR is definitely coming. You just need to be smart. Don't believe the hype. Don't go crazy about numbers. You need to be sensible. You need to keep your costs at a sensible level. Do something unique. Think about why it works well in VR, and hopefully you'll be off to a really successful start as a developer. And that's pretty much it.